Is it just me or?
Hey, Roxy, we're having a hard time hearing you. It's very faint.
Very faint.
Oh dear.
There you go.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. I don't know what's going on.
This after you do all the practice and test everything without fail. Just like a sales demo.
What a lovely icebreaker we got going here. All right, cool. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah, now we can.
Good now. Okay, awesome. That's exciting. So like I said, we'll give folks a few minutes to join. While we do that, we'll do a quick icebreaker on what is the best day that y'all have had recently. So Brandon, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I'm a father. Yesterday was Father's Day, so it doesn't really get any better than that. My older boys were playing in a couple of different baseball tournaments on in different parts of Austin. So that kept us pretty busy, but we capped the day with a pizza party at home, and we recently built a new pool in our backyard. So
fun.
Christened the pool. It's really the first time the whole family has swam in the new pool. So that was a good day.
That sounds like an awesome Father's Day. Shankar, any good days recently?
This is a little cheeky, but it happened today actually. I was walking to the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee, and my little one, 8-month-old, looks at me, and for the first time he calls me Appa, which means dad, right, in my language or where I come from. And I cried actually. So
I'm about to cry.
Yeah, it was a good feeling for sure.
That's awesome. Congratulations on that. Richard, any good days recently that can top either of those?
Probably can't top getting called dad for the first time ever. I'm not myself just yet, fingers crossed, but we did have a Father's Day celebration yesterday for my father-in-law and my uncle. So we went down to San Diego, had a little barbecue in the backyard, and I was in charge of the grill, which I love doing, so that the dads could just relax and have some beers and enjoy some food. So that was a really fun time, beautiful weather in San Diego yesterday. And then another really good day was the Warriors winning the NBA championship again after a couple of years off. So that was really great for my buddy and I who live in LA. We're, Bay Area transplants, and, we've gone to the parades in the past and celebrated. So it was just really cool to celebrate with a friend that, you've been following the team for a while. So that was, that was
bandwagoners.
that.
Great. And Andrew, wrap it up.
Yeah, yesterday was a pretty epic day as well. But over Memorial Day weekend, I took that Friday off of work and just put the phone down and took my 2 kids, my daughter who's 8 and my son 9, and my wife, and we went fly fishing on the Truckee River up in Tahoe. So it was just a good, fun day. My son loves fly fishing. My daughter had never done it, and she just fell in love with it too. And so it was just fun being on the river, disconnected and just in nature with the family.
Can appreciate that.
Did you catch anything?
Yeah, caught a big brown trout, probably about 18 inches. It was a monster. Ooh. Yeah.
Wow.
Everybody caught a couple fish, which is kind of rare on the lower Truckee River because the water's flowing pretty good right now. So it was
That's
awesome
impressive.
Day. Yeah.
I was in Yosemite last weekend, and all I could think about was moving to Truckee. So
yeah.
I get that. All right, great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Love hearing about everybody's great days recently, though. That's really heartwarming. So today we're here to talk about a spicy, applicable topic for many of you out there. We're going to be discussing adapt or die, how to appeal to the evolving 2022 buyer. We're halfway through the year already, but still definitely focusing on how to close out strongly. So this should be good for all of y'all out there. We've got some great panelists with us today, some great fathers, and congratulations again to everyone. And we're excited about the amazing content and takeaways that you're going to be getting out of this event today. So today's event is brought to you by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar with Modern Sales Pros, it's the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. And our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own. No need to recreate the wheel on your own. We got people here to help you out and help you see around corners that you may not know about. We do this through live events like today's sessions, an online forum, and quarterly summits. And we're starting to get back into in-person events as well. Super excited for that. If you're not already a member of MSP, you'll be invited to join after this event. And also coming up, we have, if you love our content today, we have an excellent 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening in July on the 12th through the 14th. We've pulled it together, 16 amazing content and speakers. You'll be able to hear from the CEOs of ZoomInfo, SalesLoft, Clary, and Winning by Design, as well as sales leaders as HubSpot, Dually Outreach, Atrium, and so many more. And I'll drop the link in to sign up right after this. But enough about MSP. Today's session wouldn't be possible without our lovely, amazing sponsors over at BuyerAssist. And I'm going to hand it over to Shankar to say a few words about BuyerAssist. Shankar?
Thank you for that, Roxy. Good to meet you all. Quick intro or elevator pitch to BuyerAssist. We are a buyer engagement platform that B2B sales teams use along with their buyers to make sure they're aligned, they collaborate, and drive clarity at each step in the enterprise sales and buying process. Some of our most successful use cases include, using mutual success plans to improve deal management, streamlining the handoff from sales to customer success, and also ultimately standardizing how companies or sales teams do deal reviews to accelerate win rates. Looking forward to the webinar today. Back to you, Roxy.
Thank you so much for that. And I'll drop the link in right away after this as well. Sorry, of course, now my computer is freezing a little bit. All right, so just to go over some quick housekeeping rules. And again, thank you so much, BuyerAssist, and thanks, Shankar. So we're excited to dive in. And like I said, we'll go over some quick housekeeping notes. First and foremost, this event is being recorded. You'll have access to recording and the key takeaways on the previous events page on the MSP website. Second, if you have any questions for our panelists, please don't hesitate. Go ahead and drop them right into the Q&A section or into the chat, and we'll get to that as soon as possible. And now let's go ahead and get introduced to our speakers today. I'm going to start with Richard. I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to the other panelists. And that's about it. Richard, take it away.
Awesome. Yes, thank you so much, Roxy, and special shout out to the team at BuyerAssist, as well as our lovely Modern Sales Pro team here at Atrium. My name is Richard Lynn. I'm a senior CSM here at Atrium. I've been with the company for a little bit over 6 months now. And I come from a background in sales strategy and data infrastructure, where I built data warehouses and rolled out BI tools. Wanted to go to a smaller shop for a bigger impact, and just so happened upon Atrium, which is really driving the message home around data-driven sales management. So very excited to be here, as well as helping to moderate this panel with our esteemed panelists here. Would love to turn it over to each of the panelists here to introduce themselves. I think that we kind of heard from Shankar already around what BuyerAssist is, but would love to hear from you, Shankar, on your background and how you found yourself leading such a great company and here on this panel today. So Shankar, if you could kick us off.
Thank you for that, Richard. Again, I'm Shankar Ganapati. I go by Shanks. I'm one of the co-founders here at BuyerAssist. Previously, I was part of the sales leadership team at a company called Mindtickle, which is a sales enablement category creator. And part of why we started BuyerAssist also goes in my journey of enterprise sales for the last 10 plus years, where I've sold and managed key accounts, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 accounts, and looking forward to solving many of the challenges that salespeople face in selling into these accounts through BuyerAssist mutual success platform. Thank you for that. Back to you, Richard.
Great. Thank you, Shankar. And let's just move down the line here. So Andrew, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me today. So Andrew Balthway, lead sales and success here at Speckit. Speckit's a just-in-time learning platform. So we work a lot with customer success and revenue teams to help drive the right type of behavior inside your tools versus going to maybe a traditional LMS or Google Drive to search for those battle cards. Maybe it's your sales process. So we work a lot with financial institutions, but also a lot of high growth sales organizations like Outreach and Snowflake and Databricks, for example. So been with the company for a couple of years now. We've just seen explosive growth over the last couple of years. And previous to Speckit, I've just been leading sales organizations for almost 20 years now. Started my career early off on as an SDR, which I'm super proud of. I always talk about SDR and BDR programs being the core to the sales organization, and moved my way up and have led successful sales teams at Zendesk, TalkDesk, and WalkMe prior to Speckit. So great to be here, and great to be on this panel with everybody else as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Andrew. And last but not least, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for joining us, everybody. I am a father of 5, husband of 1, based in Austin now, but I've lived all over the country and also in Europe. I've been in sales for 19 years, 15 of which I've been a sales leader. I've led sales for 3 different companies that have gone from pretty small to pretty large. The most recent is Qualia, where I lead sales now. We're looking to make it easier for people in this country to buy and sell homes. And we do that by fixing the totally broken infrastructure that exists in real estate today with technology. We've grown from about 20 million in ARR. We'll close the year at about 100+ million ARR this year. I arrived 3 years ago, and we're going to keep it going. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for introducing yourselves, and also thank you again for joining this panel for this really rich discussion that we're going to have on the modern buyer in 2022. Just to kind of set the stage a little bit on the content here, with the really massive global digitalization that we've seen in the last few years for a number of different factors, the buyer's journey has changed dramatically. And what we're finding is buyers are doing more research up front before they reach out to a salesperson. They're often armed with highly intelligent questions, well thought out buying criteria, as well as objections. And so the reason that we're here today is to kind of discuss how we want to influence this new breed of buyer and make sure that our sales methodologies, our approaches, and our go-to-market are aligned with this brave new world. And to that end, I would love to sort of kick off with what is a modern buyer? We're using this term very commonly. We've talked about digitalization. We've talked about the modern approach, but what does that really play out when it comes to these buyer personas and how we ultimately appeal to them? And so would love to kind of start with maybe Brandon on how you kind of view these new personas.
Yeah, sure. Well, it certainly depends on the buyer persona. I think in general, buyers are now coming into the sales funnel way further down the marketing and sales funnel than they ever have before. For example, if you're selling to an IT buyer, I mean, they're coming in with an education on the different vendors or products that they're considering. They have the education. They're now looking to enter into a go, no-go phase of their decision-making process where they're gathering final requirements and they want to talk about commercials. I think, 10 or 15 years ago, those IT buyers were coming in the funnel way up here. So as an AE or a salesperson, there was a lot to do on the education side, and there was a lot more thorough discovery required. I think now with an IT buyer, for example, they're coming in way down here. There's probably less technical discovery that's required, and it's more around making sure that you can map those technical requirements with some sort of alleviation of pain, solving some kind of business problem or helping them reach some kind of business objectives. And then you become more of a Sherpa or a guide to help them get what's needed for their go, no-go to be completed. And hopefully the decision is a go. If we shift gears a little bit and you're selling, let's say, vertical SaaS like Qualia is, or Toast or Procore, you're familiar with those companies. A lot of times you're selling to a CEO, so you're selling to the C-suite, or you're selling to an owner of a small or medium-sized business. And in those cases, I think you're engaging the buyer a little further to the top of the funnel. They're still coming in pretty well educated because they're consuming content online. However, you really have to be more thorough with the business discovery in those cases, and a little bit more strategic with the discovery that you're doing, because you're typically talking to someone who not only cares about solving the business problem, but they also care about the economics a whole lot more. And I think in those cases, education becomes a key task of the seller. And so I think another thing to mention is whether it's SMB or mid-market or enterprise, no matter what segment you're selling into, those businesses are solving more problems with technology today than they ever have before. So I think making sure you clearly understand what the persona's objectives and pain are, mapping that to what the future state can be is still critical, but you do have the modern buyer coming in a little further down the funnel than I say they ever have before.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it completely makes sense. And I'm really appreciating the perspective you're bringing from the vertical SaaS perspective of a very kind of focused type solution rather than sort of a broad B2B sort of world that I come from. So it's really interesting to kind of hear the perspective of somebody who's maybe an SMB or smaller type of customer who's looking for a very specific solution to a specific problem. Yeah, would love to hear, Shankar, maybe from you on your take on the modern buyer.
Yeah, again, I think great answer there, Brandon. So I'll try to talk about this from purely the buyer's lens and what they go through in the B2B buying, right? So some interesting things that we learned in a number of recent B2B buyer interview. One of the buyers, they were buying a 2.25 million 3-year contract from a vendor, marketing automation vendor, and this was a medical device company. And towards the end of the buying process, the primary buyer realized that they have to go sell to a new financial committee, and this buying was actually competitive. That is, they're not competing with any other vendor. They're competing with some other vendor who's not even selling a competitive solution. And for example, you could be selling to a marketing solution and you're competing against an HR solution when you're bidding to finance team on why your project should be funded over them. So just like we talk about B2B sales to be extremely competitive, what we don't necessarily look and think is B2B buying is becoming extremely competitive, where you are not just bidding against your direct competitors, but also your indirect competitors on why are you the most relevant solution right now. So that is one interesting behavior that we've seen recently. Another interesting behavior that we see a lot is how much of a overwhelming life that a B2B buyer has today, right? And today, digital, we all speak about digital to be the new frontier, right? And the challenge with digital to be the new frontier is creating and distributing content has become extremely cheap, right? Where you can go create something that is really good, really compelling, and push it out to the buyers. And more often than not, your competition, both direct and indirect, are pushing out something very similar, but something very contrasting. And this means B2B buyers, are getting more and more confused, and they almost have started developing this sense of I need to block off vendors until I'm very clear about what I want. And they end up not coming to the sales team or vendors until they're fully certain on what they want to solve. And by the time your ability to recraft the narrative, recraft the problem, recraft the solution becomes a much more difficult objective. So again, those are two things that we've seen a lot in terms of B2B buying. And obviously a lot of this is serious investments that B2B sales teams are making in terms of how they change their sales playbook, how they change their sales methodology. That's probably something we'll talk further into this conversation.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for that perspective, Shankar. Really insightful on the enterprise buyer perspective as well. Andrew, would love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think the most agree with everything Shankar and Brandon said. I think what's most interesting that I'm always kind of thinking about and talking about is our buyers are consumers at the end of the day. Like even in B2B SaaS, which is the area that we are in today, like they are consumers at the end of the day. And the iPhone and this just like real time information I can go get the information I need. And so as a company, as an organization, as a sales organization, you need to be able to meet that buyer where they're at in the funnel. So to Brandon's point as well, like if you have like a BDR team that's sourcing it, you're going to need to be able to educate them and meet them there where they're at in that funnel versus somebody that's come to me and said like, hey, I want demo. Hey, I'm doing some research. And so it's really important to meet them where they're at in their process and journey. And the biggest thing that I often see and that I've experienced, it's when you're not prepared as the seller, like that buyer runs away. And there's so many like sellers out there that just kind of show up to go through the process versus you should be just as informed as that buyer. There's great stats from Forrester and Gartner that talk about like most enterprise buyers don't think, like only 36%, I think is the stat, think their sellers actually prepared for that meeting. And when you're not prepared, you're not going to be able to meet them and then help them understand how to evaluate your solution, right? At the end of the day, as a company, as a seller and representing the business you represent, you need to be able to meet that buyer and help them understand how to evaluate the solution to get to the business problem. And I think more so than ever right now, which is kind of where the market's at, everybody's, hitting pause on some tech spend in some ways, or they're looking at their tech stacks and there's so much going on in the marketplace. You have to show up as the seller to meet that buyer and really help them understand what the business problem is they're trying to solve for. They'll probably understand there's some pains. And I think we're going to talk a little about this today as well, of like, multiple people involved, but you got to be able to meet that buyer, be prepared and drive them through your evaluation so that they can come up with an answer. And if you do a great job, it should be, choosing your solution to move forward with as well.
Yeah. Great feedback, Andrew. And kind of a follow-up to that, also selfishly for me being on a go-to-market team, like how do you know where in the journey this buyer is and ultimately prepare for that? I mean, is it a matter of kind of tagging the variety of content marketing and just understanding where the lead comes in? Is there kind of another method that you kind of advise your sales teams to do? What does that look like?
I mean, there's a few things. One, great collaboration with marketing. I mean, marketing needs to be your best friend in understanding the data, the information. Again, just like the buyer, they're doing all this research, accessing all these reports, information, hopefully from your website, if it is coming in from that. And if your BDRs are aligned with marketing and sending them the right pieces of content and understanding what they are clicking on and where their knowledge or interest might be, is a huge proponent of that, right? And you have to have that alignment to be able to come into that conversation educated and at the end of the day, to speed up the sales cycle at the end of the day. Like they're looking to hopefully make a decision, or maybe they are just in the educational phase, wherever they are again. So I think that is like a massive, massive piece of understanding where the buyers are at. And then also a couple of things we do at Speckit that I'm just big on is one is just doing your own research. Right? We call it the hypothesis. Like, why do you think, I'll use Brandon example, why do you think Brandon from Quality is coming to us? Right? Is it because there's so much data on LinkedIn about the company, on social, everything else? Like, why do we think that company is coming to us so that we can have a hypothesis going into that conversation and then be able to drive the conversation as we go forward? The other big thing we do too is just, some blocking. I call it blocking and tackling, just things like preconditioned emails, like, hey, what do you want to get out of this meeting? So I'm prepared. So that way you can, again, meet the buyer where they're at in the journey and just keep alignment all the way through success plans, mutual buying plans as you go through that cycle as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone for your take on, what are the characteristics of a modern buyer. But in an ever evolving landscape, we've seen a lot of change over the last few years, but things are even changing now. I think Andrew mentioned, a tightening macro environment that's out there and folks are kind of reevaluating tech stacks. And so, kind of in the current view, what are some of the challenges that a modern buyer would face in today's B2B buying cycle? Maybe Shankar, you can kick us off with this one.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? And timely, especially in the current macro environment that Andrew pointed out. See, again, as you think about this again from a buyer perspective, right? And you ask any of your buyers, people on the panel or people who are listening to this webinar, how do they differentiate between you and your competition, right? And objectively, without you biasing them, they're going to say everyone looks and sounds the same. It's extremely difficult for buyers today to differentiate, one vendor from the other, and they could be looking at someone who's not even competitive with you and to solve the same problem. And this, obviously poses a big challenge for the modern buyer, because again, they have a day job. They're not in the business of buying. They're in the business of running their business. And in the middle of that, they need to go figure out which vendor to pick to solve my problem. That's what number one problem. The second problem that modern buyers face is that most purchases, most B2B buying is today cross-functional, right? And you can't just go solve for your own problem. For example, the problem that Andrew highlighted, right? Sales can't live without marketing. Right? It has to have a tight cross-functional relationship with marketing, right? And for you to do that, you need to buy tools which integrate sales and marketing, and therefore any buying that the marketing or sales ends up making ends up having sales at least involved, the counterpart at least involved. And as we think about what are the best salespeople doing, already, right? Because if you think about your top 5% salespeople, they can sell anything, your product, the previous company, the next company, and so on. If you think about what they are doing, and we've studied a lot of the salespeople, and there's one thing that emerged, very clearly. The best salespeople are ruthlessly focused on customer advocacy. They really care about what the customer wants to achieve. They really care about ensuring that the customer is achieving that. And eventually it comes down to, what decision do I make, or what decision do I have the most confidence in terms of, making the right purchase decision. And the rest people understand this intuitively. They don't even need to think about this, right? They know it intuitively, and they work towards carrying their team, carrying their leadership team, their extended team. They carry their champion, they carry the buying team. They make sure everyone's life that they touch is made extremely easy, extremely simple. And that also means they make it easy for the buyers to buy from them. And that's again how you can, if you think about the modern buyer and how the best salespeople are solving for that. These are the four, the four key characteristics for them.
Awesome. Thank you, Shankar. I really appreciate the insight that you brought on. Everybody looks the same when you're a buyer evaluating different stacks, and sometimes you get compared to folks that you're not even really a direct competitor with. I've definitely run into some of that in my time at Atrium. So yeah, really appreciate that, and also love the note on your top reps. The one thing that they do really, really well anywhere in a top 5% rep is being a customer advocate and always kind of solving the customer problem. Definitely something that rings true with a lot of the top reps that I've worked with as well. Andrew, what do you think in terms of challenges for the modern buyer?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges are internal for them as well. On average, you're going to have 4, 5, 6 people involved in a buying process. Maybe in an SMB organization, you might have 2 or 3 because they're just going to move a lot quicker. But to like what Brandon Shakar was talking about earlier too, it's like when you have 4, 6 people involved, you have 2 other people over here that are looking at other tools, right? Because there is so much technology out there, and at the end of the day, like what's happening inside the business is everybody has maybe a different perspective on how they look at to solve that problem, right? And oftentimes it's really around some business pains because the problem sitting up top with, depending on where you're selling. So like our world's sitting with the CRO who's trying to drive sales efficiency, trying to drive rep productivity, and trying to drive revenue at the end of the day. So really helping these organizations and these buyers, right? Because it's just not one person, helping these buyers come together during the evaluation, and you have to guide them through that process of like helping them really understand. And half the time it's just asking the question, but it's sometimes asking those tough questions to really align on what is the ultimate outcome you're trying to drive. And when you can do that as part of your selling process, that's when you have that top 5% that you guys were just talking about. Those sellers that can get to that with these buyers and bring the buying party together through that process and align on that are the ones that find a ton of success. And so again, that's like the biggest challenge is everybody's looking. And the other fact too is, this PLG motion, which is product led growth, a lot of people are able to go try the technology, right? Do a trial, get in there and start to make some assumptions. So again, trying to bring these parties together is super important. And I think that's a challenge when you're just, working with 1 or 2 people. You have to remember there's 2 or 3 people probably behind the scenes that are looking at the competition or other tools as well. So really getting them to come together. And the PLG strategy is a strong strategy, especially when you're tightly aligned with the marketing organization to help drive that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're never just demoing for the person on screen. You're demoing for their manager and everyone else on the committee as well.
Yep, exactly. And just even like the follow-ups, right? Like, I think when you're trying to bring these parties together, you have to always remember, like, I say this all the time, that email that you sent as a follow-up is getting forwarded to somebody. So how do you stand out? Like, share a quick loom of like, hey, this is how we're going to solve your problem, because you might only get one shot. If it's just a bunch of links or a bunch of words in that follow-up mutual plan, like it's going to get lost in the fray of emails. So again, continue trying to set yourself apart and differentiate yourself and your organization, and the problem you're going to go help them solve is just really key.
Yeah, 100%. Brandon, any thoughts on challenges for the modern buyer?
Sure. Yeah, couldn't agree more with what Andrew is saying. And just getting back to what Shankar was talking about, there are more ways to solve a business problem than ever before. There are applications that exist out there. There are more options, more solutions. And then you can build, because there are more skilled developers on this planet than there ever have been before, a lot of companies can go and build their own apps or solutions for some of these business problems. So with all of these options out there, as a buyer, how do I make the right decision? Do I need a go, no-go matrix? Who in my org, like getting back to what we were talking about before, what Andrew and Shanks were talking about before, is like who in the organization or in the company needs to be involved in the decision? Who needs to be a part of the committee? If you think about if you're doing an enterprise sale or a complex sale today, just like you're trying to identify who the economic buyer is and who the champion is and who the other key players in the decision-making process are, not only that, but internally you're trying to figure out who's on the selling team, who needs to be involved to help put you in the best position to win this deal or be successful in this sales motion. The buyer's trying to figure out that same piece on their side. Who should be involved in this committee and what role do they play in the decision-making process? So the better we understand that as sellers, the more likely we are to be successful in that sales motion. In addition, listening to the other guys talk, the great John McMahon coined this term, the seller deficit disorder, right? Which is like two variables. That salespeople don't listen and salespeople don't understand my business. And I think that's the deficit that we as sellers are working from. And so how do we close that delta or fill that deficit is by doing really, really, really thoughtful discovery. And I think there are two outcomes we're really looking for. We want to know where they are in the where they're coming in the funnel, where they're at in that buyer's journey. Are they in this awareness phase where they don't know much about your products and services? That's what we run into commonly with smaller and medium-sized businesses when we're selling vertical SaaS. Or are they in an education phase where they're now consuming lots of content? They are pretty well educated, not only on your product, but on the other vendors that can solve the problem in a similar way or help them meet that business objective or reach that business objective in a similar way. Or are they really in further down the funnel in the selection phase where they want to talk about commercials, but there's still some other boxes that need to be checked. So you learn those things by doing thoughtful discovery and qualification. And then I think finally what that discovery allows you to do is make sure you clearly understand who on their side needs to be involved in the decision, what their exact decision process is, the decision criteria is, will your product service meet the requirements that they have? Will it actually solve the problem in a meaningful way for their business, or is it just smoke and mirrors? And then once we understand that we can solve their problem and we know exactly who on their side is involved in the decision-making process, we can really start to map, this is the current state of where you're at today. This is the future state of where you want to go. Here's how we can get you there. But you as the seller need to know how the key parties, the people involved in their decision, can help you understand to make it real for them to get to the current state, to the future state. And if you can make it real to them, it becomes real to them. And I think those are some really critical things to think about as a seller when we're thinking about what challenges the modern buyer is facing today.
Absolutely. Brandon, a follow-up to that, would you go so far as to even suggest a customer bring on more relevant folks on the buyer side to review the solution?
Yeah, it really depends. But I think with our business, we have a gross churn that's in the rate that's in the single digits, and so it's really important for us to like qualify the buyer and set very accurate expectations with our customers or prospects before they become customers and onboard. And so I think the more complex the product is, and there is like a tipping point where it becomes like you're involving too many people and you're actually hurting not only your chances to win the deal, but you're making it overly complicated for the buyer. But there is a balance that you can find where if it's a very complex solution that solves a myriad of problems, you do need to invite other parties on their side into the decision-making process. It strengthens your argument and ultimately increases the conversion rate.
Yeah, thank you for that. And congrats on that churn number. That sounds amazing.
That I have very little to do with it, but I take it.
Awesome. I wanted to chat a little bit about mutual success plans. So, we've talked a little bit about that capability. And so, want to understand a little bit more around helping the sales team and the selling side align with the buyer and ultimately with kind of the modern buyer preferences. And I think, Shankar, you're kind of our sitting expert here on mutual success plans. So would love to get your take on this.
No, totally. I think, as we think about mutual success plans, we always end up just talking about the seller and buyer and how they need to align, obviously, on a shared definition of success and outcomes. But if you take a step back and think about this from a leadership standpoint, number one, I think a mutual success plan, a culture of having a mutual success plan in every active opportunity ensures that one, sales leader is able to drive the best practice at scale, especially if you're a growing team, new reps coming in, new deals, new market, new type of customer, ensuring that the best practices that your best sellers are doing, all the deals have them being followed is number one. It also helps you make sure that you're aligning your sales process, your sales playbook with the buyer preferences. That's number one. Second, number two, if you're a sales manager, sales leader in the middle management, a mutual success plan also streamlines deal reviews. It streamlines how you want to understand what does it need, what needs to be done for a deal to be coming home. Is the rep on top of all the actions? Is the actions that they've understood aligned with their customers, with their buyers? It streamlines how the deal is being reviewed. Every single weekly pipeline reviews, weekly calls, etc. And ultimately, for the frontline team, the sales team, the seller, the pre-sales team supporting the seller, it's about educating the buyer, the first-time buyer especially, on the best practices on how to buy from you, making them to your previous question. Do you need to bring in new stakeholders? Maybe you have to in some industries, right? And do you need to have a different value prop for a different stakeholder? Maybe in some case you have to. Right? Having that conversation with your primary buyer becomes critical. And also, for the frontline team, it's about equipping and enabling their champions to sell on their behalf. Again, there is wide research done by Gartner, Forrester, and more recently Winning by Design, which talks about how much salespeople have limited access to the extended buying team, while the primary buying team obviously has a big say on the what vendor to partner with. The extended buying team that we may not interface with, have a much bigger weight today than what they had a few years ago, and therefore enabling and equipping your champion to sell on your behalf, where they almost become your salesperson, right? And for them to become your salesperson, you need to build that trust, and that is where a mutual success plan becomes the right framework for you to build trust with your customers.
Yeah, agreed. It's a complex selling world these days, and this is a nice sort of central method of making sure that we're all aligned and we're all attacking the same goal. Brandon, would love to hear from you on your take on mutual success plans.
Yeah, this is something we've had some version of in place for forever. I've said this exact thing to Shankar in the past, but as a sales leader, the biggest risk to our revenue goals is the inability to predict prospect behavior. So not only does having a mutual success plan in place, if you can get AEs to actually follow it with discipline, but what a mutual success plan does is it not only makes the revenue more predictable for the seller and the sales leader, but it it actually makes positive business outcomes more predictable for the buyer, and they get their problems solved or business objectives met in a more predictable manner. All those parties we talked about that Andrew talked about being involved in the process, we keep them on the same page. We're clearly documenting what their role is, all the decision criteria and the exact process, because the timeline's almost always going to change. You never stick with, at least, the larger the deal, the less likely you are to stick with that original close date, right? That changes pretty frequently because the buyer's timeline changes. And we can manage that. We can do things to manage that with discipline, but it's going to change. And so I think that's where a mutual success plan really brings it together, helps keep you as the seller organized, helps keep the buyer organized, makes for a more likely positive outcome for both parties.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a subject I'm passionate about as well in terms of proving value post-sale, since I'm on the CSM side. So really great when we can get our pre-sale through to transaction, ultimately through to providing that value for our customers. Andrew, what are your thoughts on aligning on mutual success plans?
Yeah, I agree with everything Brandon and Shakar said. The thing that I would add to it, and they both touched on this, is like when you can get to Brandon's point, when you get the sellers to actually use it, get the buyers engaged in it as well. The key to it is the measurement of it. Yes, it helps you drive the predictable revenue from that standpoint, but like really measuring where you're at in that mutual action plan per where you're at in the sales cycle is key, right? Because from there you can start to understand, are buyers' needs changing? Are the problems in the market starting to shift? Whatever might be happening, because again, like every 6 months things are changing, and you have to be consistently changing as a selling organization. And so I think it's just really critical when you're using your mutual action plans to really be measuring where you're at. To Brandon's point, like, and Shakar's point as well, like it's going to develop and grow with that buyer as they move through the funnel. And if you're not using something to measure that, like you're going to be kind of playing guess with where the deal is at, as it's when you're trying to forecast, when you're looking at the business, and most importantly, when you're trying to coach the reps, right? When you're trying to guide them on how to go win in the marketplace and beat competition. So I just think that's really critical. And I also am a big believer these mutual action plans also go over with customer success. You should be able to measure with a customer, like, are they actually engaged with us? Are they, following along with like what their plan was after deployment? Are they, moving into the next phase of their maturity model, what a successful customer looks like? So again, mutual action plans are for the lifetime of a customer. It's just not for the sales organization. You should be using them in customer success as well, just to keep that customer driving success. So that way you can keep those single digit gross retention numbers like Brandon's doing at Qualia, which is amazing. So again, I think, it's through the cycle, it's measuring them on an ongoing basis, and using that to be able to also give great feedback to product marketing and marketing as well. Like, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what our organizations are measuring from an ROI perspective. So, as a revenue leader, you should be sharing this information across the organization, even with product as well.
Yeah, completely agree. Again, coming from the post-sale side, love to see those plans in place to make sure that we're providing that value. And then, of course, still jealous of Brandon's churn number. We have a question here from the audience from Michael. So thanks for bumping the question. And also for anyone in the audience who wants to add a question here in the waning minutes of this panel. The question was whether buyers buy to pain, sellers sell to pain, or buyers buy to results. And then ultimately, how do you bridge these critical performance gaps so that folks are kind of aligning with their best-in-class peers? So I think the question as I read this is like, what do you see mostly, maybe in your business or maybe broadly in the market? And yeah, I'll just open this up if anybody wants to answer this question.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. I think this is like over the last few years of, so many people were buying just technology. It was really easy to go buy tools. I think, again, as I mentioned, where things are at today, the economy, things are tightening a little bit. So I think oftentimes people do come in with and I was touching on this earlier, they come in with these business pains, right? They have a list of 4 or 5 things like, hey, we need to go solve for these use cases and these pains. And as a seller, it's your job to go align not to what the pains are, but what's the outcome and the ultimate problem or problems, right, that they're trying to solve for. And that's usually sitting oftentimes with somebody above them or maybe 2 layers above them that has tasked the team to go look for tools. So I think it's really important to really understand where you're at in your cycle, and do you really understand the outcomes and the ultimate problem they're trying to solve for. Like that is like key. And if you can align to that, that's where you find, best in class solutions. It ties to the CS organization. Again, it makes the customer successful. And it's a challenge, right? It's not an easy thing to get those multiple 4 or 6 people involved and to get them aligned on the ultimate problem. But when you can, and you can map back to that solution and the results, that's where best in class really happens.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, right? I see, if you think about plotting this almost like a graph, right? Moving from, say, SMB to enterprise and a junior buyer to a senior buyer. I think if you plot a graph around, people who buy for pain, people who buy for gain, people and the solution, etc., right? You would see that as you gravitate towards enterprise and senior buyers, there are more and more going to be outcome focused, more and going to be biased to vendors or salespeople who can map not just their pain but also the gain that they're going to have in a predictable time frame. Obviously, it doesn't mean that correlation doesn't exist if you're selling to an SMB, but more often than not they're going to come to you with, hey, I need these 4 features, right? And I've looked at you in the competition, tell me why you're better than them, right? Which is a very different type of sale. Versus if you go to enterprise or even a commercial account and try to do a decent sized transaction, there you're going to more, even if they come with a solution, you have to go back to the pain, go back to the outcome that they're desiring, validate that not just with 1 or 2 stakeholders, but the entire buying committee that you need to identify. Right? So it depends on who you're selling to and at what stage of maturity they are in their buying journey, and also what type of company they are, in order to really nail down which of this is obviously top of mind for the buyer and critical for sale.
Awesome. Thanks both for your feedback. We've got another question here from Shiam. Who in an organization should care about the experience you're delivering to modern B2B buyers, and why?
Well, I think if we're talking about, if we have both sides of the transaction, right? Or both sides of the relationship, if you are, and I think this has already been said in several different ways, but if you're the selling party, so you have a solution that solves the problem and you're selling it to the buyer, you should be very concerned about making sure that you're managing that buyer experience in a responsible way. So you're getting that customer to the outcome that they're looking for. You're setting accurate expectations. You're making sure that the relationship flows seamlessly from purchase to sale to post-sale. And you want the onboarding experience to be a success for the customer. And you want that customer to be, you want the life cycle of that customer to be really, really long. You want them to be a customer for a long time. And that happens if we're really responsible in the sales process and we're helping the modern buyer meet their needs. I think on the buy side, I think, not all buyers know how to buy, to Shanker's point. You have a very experienced buyer that's dealing with salespeople all the time and is responsible for making, for a number of transactions and bringing on a bunch of different vendors for their company. Like those folks know how to buy. They have the process dialed in. They're looking for the Sherpa, and they're looking for a seller who's really listening and can partner with them to get these deals done and get these business problems solved in an efficient manner. And then you have the less experienced buyer or a junior buyer. They don't purchase software all the time. We deal with that buyer a lot. So you do need to become really the guide for them. You're teaching them how to buy software. You're telling them what goes into the mutual action plan or mutual success plan in order for them to make a responsible purchasing decision. So I think showing them what the modern buying experience looks like in a non-insulting sort of covert way is really, really important.
Yeah, and I'd piggyback on that too, and just say like everybody in the organization should care about that experience, from product to product marketing to marketing to sales to customer success. Like everybody, because remember, buyers continue to buy. That buying continues with a renewal, maybe it's expansion. So everybody inside your organization should be aligned to that experience and should care about it. From the messaging to the problems we solve to what our solution solves for in the marketplace. Everybody in the organization should be aligned to it and know it and understand it at the end of the day. One thing we have our head of product marketing, Elvis, always talks about, which I love, is every single person in your company should be able to tell the market what the problem is, right? The saying used to be like, oh, if you're in an elevator with somebody, there's less elevators these days. Elevator rides up in buildings because we're all working from home. But, you know, we used to joke like you should be able to give that elevator pitch if you're in the elevator with your CEO, right? How are you going to explain what the product does? So again, I think everybody in the organization should care about that experience all the way through.
Yeah. Again, just adding to that, because we are trying to sell this problem to a lot of leaders like you and Drew or Brandon, right? And I think one of the things we notice is that, theoretically, the concept of mutual success plans exists both in sales and customer success. It lives its own silos. They hardly talk to each other. And there have been cases where, we hear sales leaders say, once it is sold, it is a CS problem. I'll obviously come back to make sure that, there's an upsell and renewal that is taken care of. But how successful they are becomes a CS problem. This I'm not talking at an individual level. I'm talking at a system design. How is organization being organized? The challenge today is that the buyer experience itself is broken down, into silos. Marketing does a certain version of buyer experience. Sales does certain version of buyer experience, and within sales, pre-sales, value consulting, you name it, they have their own versions of it. Post-sales have their own version of buyer experience, but the buyer doesn't really care. For the buyer, they buy to get to a certain outcome, and they hate it if your CSM comes and asks the same discovery questions that they spent the last 6 months educating the seller and the sales team on why they want to solve a particular problem. And I think having a clearly defined owner to solve the buyer experience problem, is becoming more and more critical, especially in today. To Andrew's point, there are no longer elevators going up in the office. We are all remote, right? And what does it mean for the buyer experience? And having that converged, perspective on the buyer journey, the buyer experience is becoming a lot more critical. And we like to believe a lot of the ownership of the buyer experience is, coming back to sales, especially if you are selling to enterprise, selling to commercial, selling to large accounts, where they look up to you as someone who's made the promise, and if you do not deliver on the promise, it's you who's going to get hurt the most. And that's at least what we are seeing in the marketplace in terms of who owns the buyer experience.
Yeah, agree with everybody's point here. Thanks, everyone, for your feedback on the questions, and thanks to the audience for the questions. Before we wrap up here, I would just like to take a moment to ask each of the panelists for your key takeaway. If we have our audience walk away with just one thing from today, what would that be? And I'll just go down the list I have here with our little video heads. Maybe we can start with Brandon.
Use a mutual success plan and be disciplined in the sales process. Don't just wing it.
Awesome feedback. Andrew?
Come prepared to these calls and these conversations as a seller, and measure those success plans as a leader, and guide your sellers through that process, and build that confidence with them. But definitely measure that, so that way you guys can build some predictable revenue as you guys go forward as well.
Awesome. And last but not least, Shankar.
Great answers already. The only thing I'll say is do genuinely care about your buyers and their preferences and expectations. You have a plan to make them successful, they'll make you successful as well.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And I will turn it over to Roxy to close us out here.
Thanks so much, Richard. You did my job today asking about the key takeaways from our panelists. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. Appreciate all of the tidbits of knowledge that everybody dropped on us today. And yeah, just want to thank BuyerAssist one more time for being such an outstanding sponsor. We really appreciate you. Everyone watching today, please make sure you check them out. And a big, giant thank you to Andrew, Shankar, and Brandon. Again, you guys are great. And Richard, you did an outstanding job stewarding this conversation. So really appreciate that a lot and all that you do. The recordings and key takeaways will be available on our site shortly after this. And don't forget to check out our upcoming events. Hope some of you guys sign up for the big summit that we have coming up in July. Everybody stay safe and we'll see you next time. And panelists, I'll see you backstage.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, guys.